All right, let's get right into it. Today we are unpacking a concept that literally sits at the very foundation of human civilization, and that is population. We so often hear it talked about just as a statistic, a number on a chart. But in this explainer, we're going to move away from those dry, theoretical definitions and dive into the incredibly high-density reality of the eighth most populous country on Earth. We are going to explore how massive numbers can actually transition from being a huge demographic challenge into a nation's absolute greatest superpower. So here is our roadmap for today. First, defining population. Second, the different fields of study. Third, the global top 10. Fourth, our focus on Bangladesh. Fifth, breaking down population distribution. And finally, number 6, the economic backbone. Starting right off with Section 1, defining population, the basics. So what actually is a population? Broadly speaking, it refers to the total number of people, animals, objects, or even items existing in a particular area or group at a certain time. Basically, it's about quantifying existence within a strictly defined boundary. And honestly, a perfect real-world example of this, the human population of Bangladesh, which currently sits at well over 170 million people, all sharing one very specific geographic space. Moving right along to Section 2, fields of population study and the different lenses we use to look at it. Let's compare demography and statistics for a second. In demography, the focus is entirely human-centric. It means the total number of human beings living in a specific geographical area, like saying, Rajshahi district has a large rural population. Demographers care deeply about things like size, growth, density, and age. Statistics, on the other hand, well, that casts a much wider net. A statistical population is just the complete set of individuals, objects, or observations a researcher wants to study. So if you want to study university study habits, then all university students in Bangladesh become your population, regardless of where they're physically located. And this brilliantly illustrates how the natural sciences contrast with the social sciences. Take biology. A population there is a group of organisms of the same species living in the same area, capable of reproducing. Think of it like tracking the decreasing tiger population in the Sundarbans. But if you pivot over to sociology, the definition becomes entirely behavioral. Sociologists define a population as a group of people living together who share social relationships and cultural patterns. It's not just about sharing a physical space. It's about how, say, an urban population interacts fundamentally differently than a rural one. Okay, hitting Section 3, the global top 10, looking specifically at the 2026 rankings. Just take a second to absorb this massive data drop. At the very top, you've got the billion-plus demographic giants, right? India at roughly 1.47 billion, closely followed by China at 1.41 billion. The drop-off after that is pretty staggering, with the United States trailing in third at 349 million. But I want to draw your attention a bit further down the list. Right there at number 8 sits Bangladesh with an estimated 177.8 million people. And to really understand why a nation of its physical size holding this many people is so globally significant, we need to zoom in. Which brings us nicely to Section 4. Our focus, Bangladesh, an absolute demographic powerhouse. 177.8 million people. By 2026, that is the estimated population of Bangladesh. This sheer scale solidifies its position as the 8th most populous country in the entire world, and the 5th in all of Asia. But what makes this so incredibly significant is fitting that massive demographic footprint into a relatively small geographic landmass. To put it in perspective, it's literally like taking the entire population of Russia, adding 30 million more people, and then fitting every single one of them into a space smaller than the U.S. state of Iowa. The proportions here are just wow. They're staggering. Bangladesh contains approximately 2.14% of the entire world's total population. Think about that for a second. Out of the vast expanse of the globe, over 2% of the entire human race lives within the borders of the single nation. It gives it one of the absolute highest population densities anywhere on the planet. All right, let's look at Section 5, Population Distribution Explained. Basically, where are people living and why? So population distribution is simply the pattern of how people spread across an area, where they cluster together and where they don't. In Bangladesh, we see a massive contrast. The capital city, Dhaka, has an incredibly high population density. It's packed, it's bustling, mostly because it acts as this giant magnet for jobs, education, and business. On the flip side, if you look at the hill tracts or remote coastal areas, you see a much lower population distribution. They're sparsely populated simply because the terrain and the isolation make daily life and, quite frankly, economic survival a lot more challenging. Because, as you probably know, human beings don't just settle randomly. It's highly calculated for survival and prosperity. People naturally cluster based on a few key factors: a favorable climate, fresh water, and crucially, employment opportunities. Add in robust transportation networks, good education, health facilities, and fertile land, and you can see exactly why populations naturally migrate toward urban centers like Dhaka and tend to move away from dense forests or remote mountains. And that brings us to our final takeaway in Section 6, the economic backbone, or viewing people as the ultimate resource. Our source material hits the nail on the head with this idea. Without population, a country cannot use its natural resources, build industries, produce food, or develop education and culture. Really, people are the primary engine of development and social progress. A country can be incredibly rich in oil or minerals or fertile soil, but without human beings to extract, refine, farm, and innovate, well, those resources are just completely inert. But here is the catch, and this is absolutely vital. A large population is a total double-edged sword. On one hand, a productive and educated population is a massive catalyst. It increases national income and raises the overall standard of living. However, an unskilled and rapidly growing population does the exact opposite. It creates widespread unemployment, deepens poverty, strains food supplies, and places just overwhelming pressure on natural resources. The difference between an economic boom and a systemic burden? It's entirely dependent on the quality, education, and skill level of the people. And we are seeing this dynamic play out in real time in Bangladesh. Its massive population of 177.8 million provides the essential human labor force that drives its vital agriculture and its booming ready-made garments industry. That sector in particular relies heavily on human labor to contribute massively to the national economy. It's actually the exact same fundamental principle we see in countries like Japan, right? They leverage their highly skilled and educated population to drive global technological development. Ultimately, the labor force is the engine.
So that leaves us with this final thought. When we look at these global demographic tables and we see numbers in the hundreds of millions or even billions, we have to look past the digits. The true measure of a nation's future isn't just how many people it has, but how it invests in them. So the question you've got to ask yourself is, will a rapidly growing population be left unskilled and viewed as a burden? Or will it be educated, empowered, and cultivated into a nation's ultimate superpower? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will catch you in the next one.